In this episode, we move from the urgent work of containment and eradication into the equally important challenge of bringing systems, services, and business operations back in a way that is both functional and trustworthy. For brand new learners, recovery can sound like the easy part because the threat seems to be under control, but in real organizations, this phase is often where careful leadership matters most. A rushed return to service can put damaged systems back online, reintroduce hidden compromise, confuse employees, and create a second wave of disruption that may be even harder to explain than the original incident. That is why this topic matters so much for anyone studying the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, because strong security leadership is not only about stopping the problem. It is also about restoring the organization safely, making sure confidence is earned rather than assumed, and helping the business resume operations without carrying forward the same weakness, uncertainty, or exposure that caused trouble in the first place. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful place to start is by understanding that recovery and restoration are related ideas, but they are not exactly the same. Recovery is the broader process of returning the organization to a stable and acceptable operating condition after an incident, while restoration is more specifically the act of bringing back systems, data, access, and services that were disrupted, removed, or taken offline. This distinction matters because an organization can restore a server, an application, or a user account without truly achieving secure recovery if deeper trust issues remain unresolved. A system may be running again, but if the cause of compromise is still uncertain, if monitoring is weak, or if critical business processes are still depending on risky workarounds, then the organization has regained activity without regaining confidence. For a beginner, that is one of the most important mindset shifts in this part of incident management. Secure recovery is not simply about getting things back. It is about getting them back in a condition the organization can reasonably trust. One of the core principles of secure recovery is that trust should come before speed, even though the pressure to restore quickly can be intense. Business leaders may be worried about customers, missed transactions, delayed operations, financial loss, and reputational harm, all of which are real concerns. At the same time, bringing systems back too early can allow the same attacker, malware, or unsafe condition to return immediately, sometimes with even worse consequences because the organization has relaxed its guard. Good recovery techniques therefore begin with asking whether the system, account, service, or data source is actually ready to be trusted again, not merely whether it is technically possible to switch it back on. That trust usually depends on several things happening first, including evidence that the threat was removed, confirmation that the system is understood well enough to evaluate, and confidence that the restoration source is clean. For CISM learners, this reinforces a management lesson that comes up often in security leadership. The fastest path back is not always the safest path forward. Prioritization is another major recovery technique because most organizations cannot and should not try to restore everything at once. Not every system has the same value, the same dependency pattern, or the same effect on the business if it remains unavailable for a little longer. A payroll platform, a patient care system, a manufacturing control function, or a customer-facing payment process will often deserve attention before low-impact internal tools or less sensitive support applications. That does not mean the smaller systems are unimportant, but it does mean leaders have to think in terms of business consequence, not just technical convenience. Secure recovery depends on understanding which services matter most, what other systems they depend on, and which restoration order will reduce risk while supporting essential operations. For a new learner, this is a powerful point because it shows that recovery is not a technical race to rebuild the most visible systems first. It is a disciplined effort to restore the business in an order that reflects operational reality, dependency chains, and the organization's tolerance for ongoing disruption. Another essential technique is making sure the source of restoration is itself trustworthy. If the organization restores from corrupted backups, outdated images, or unverified configurations. It may be rebuilding the incident rather than recovering from it. That is why backup integrity and baseline confidence matter so much in secure restoration. Teams need to know whether stored data, system images, templates, and archive configurations were protected from tampering, whether they come from a time before the compromise took hold, and whether they reflect a state the organization is still willing to trust. In some situations, the most recent backup may not be the safest one if there is reason to believe compromise existed before anyone noticed the incident. Beginners should understand that restoration is not just about having copies available. It is about knowing what those copies represent, when they were created, whether they were exposed to the same threat, and whether restoring from them will genuinely move the organization toward a cleaner and safer state rather than back into the same uncertainty it is trying to escape. A strong recovery approach is usually staged rather than immediate and universal. Instead of returning every affected system to full normal operation at the same time, mature organizations often restore in controlled phases so they can observe results, verify trust, and reduce the chance that one hidden problem causes widespread reinfection or renewed disruption. A critical service may be brought back first in a limited form, followed by selected users, then broader business functions, and only later the full supporting environment once confidence grows. This staged approach has two major strengths. It lowers risk by keeping the blast radius smaller if something was missed, and it gives responders a chance to learn from each step before committing to the next one. For a beginner, this is a useful correction to the instinct that successful recovery means flipping everything back on the moment the immediate crisis seems quieter. In reality, slow and structured restoration is often what makes recovery secure, because it respects the fact that uncertainty does not disappear all at once just because the most visible symptoms have faded. Validation plays a central role in secure recovery because restored systems need to be shown to work correctly and safely before the organization depends on them again. Functional testing alone is not enough. A service may appear available to users while still carrying insecure settings, incomplete cleanup, broken integrations, or unauthorized changes that only become obvious later under normal workload. Secure validation therefore asks both whether the system works and whether it works in a condition the organization can trust. That may include confirming expected configurations, checking access controls, reviewing logs for abnormal behavior, verifying connectivity only to approved resources, and ensuring that restored data is complete and accurate enough for business use. For new learners, this is an important distinction because recovery can look successful on the surface while still being fragile underneath. Strong organizations validate deliberately, not because they enjoy delay, but because they know a false recovery can damage credibility and operations far more than a carefully managed return to service ever will. Identity and access should receive special attention during recovery because many incidents involve compromised credentials, excessive privileges, or weak trust relationships between users, systems, and services. Restoring an application without tightening the access conditions around it can be like repairing a door while leaving the stolen key in circulation. Secure recovery techniques often include resetting privileged credentials, reviewing service accounts, revoking old sessions, replacing exposed secrets, and checking whether permissions still reflect current business need rather than historical convenience. This work can feel less dramatic than rebuilding systems, but it is often just as important because restored environments are only as trustworthy as the access paths that control them. A new learner should notice that many modern incidents move through identities more easily than through obvious technical destruction, which means recovery has to address who and what can enter the restored environment, not just whether the hardware and software are back online. A system that has been restored but remains loosely controlled is still an unsafe system. Heightened monitoring is another technique that makes secure recovery more dependable because restored environments should not immediately be treated as if nothing unusual has happened. After a significant incident, organizations benefit from a period of closer observation so they can detect signs of recurrence, mispersistence, abnormal behavior, or operational problems created by the restoration process itself. This may involve more frequent review of logs, tighter attention to account activity, watching for unusual traffic patterns, or checking whether new alerts align with the earlier incident in suspicious ways. The point is not to assume recovery has failed, but to acknowledge that restored systems deserve extra scrutiny until confidence is rebuilt through evidence rather than optimism. For a beginner, this is an important leadership concept because secure recovery is not a single moment. It is a transition period in which trust is gradually reestablished through observation, validation, and discipline. Organizations that stop paying attention too soon sometimes discover that they restored service faster than they restored security, and that gap can be costly. Communication also becomes especially important during recovery because different groups need different kinds of clarity as services return and restrictions change. Employees need to know what systems are available, what has changed, what temporary controls remain in place, and what behavior is expected from them as normal work resumes. Business leaders need to know what has been restored, what is still limited, what risks remain under active management, and what decisions may still require their involvement. Customers, partners, and other external parties may also need updates if the incident affected service levels, trust obligations, or contractual expectations. Poor communication during recovery can create false assumptions, unsafe workarounds, duplicate effort, and frustration that weakens confidence in the whole response. Good communication does not pretend everything is perfect before it is. Instead, it helps people understand what has been restored, what still needs attention, and how the organization is moving carefully from disruption toward dependable operations without overstating certainty or hiding remaining constraints. Third-party dependencies and shared services can make recovery more complicated than beginners first expect because many organizations do not operate in isolation. A restored internal system may still depend on a cloud platform, an external supplier, a managed service provider, or a business partner connection that remains uncertain or only partially recovered. In other cases, the organization may need outside support to validate configurations, re-establish service links, or confirm that a vendor-side issue is no longer affecting internal operations. Secure recovery techniques, therefore, include mapping dependencies clearly and confirming that connected services are ready to support a trusted return, not simply assuming that internal restoration automatically means the whole business process is safe again. This matters because an organization can restore its own environment carefully and still remain exposed if a link provider, external identity path, or shared platform continues to carry unresolved risk. For CISM learners, this reinforces a broader lesson about modern security. Recovery is rarely confined to what sits inside one internal boundary. It often depends on relationships the organization does not fully control but must still manage wisely. Documentation is a quieter but extremely important recovery technique because the organization needs a clear record of what was restored, in what order, from what source, under what conditions, and with what remaining assumptions or limitations. This record helps teams coordinate in real time, but it also matters afterward when people ask whether the recovery was handled carefully, whether decisions were justified, and what should be improved before the next incident. Without strong documentation, leaders may forget why a particular source was trusted, which controls were temporarily relaxed, or what warnings were accepted during a difficult restoration decision. That kind of uncertainty makes later review weaker and future planning less reliable. For a beginner, the key point is that secure recovery is not only a technical exercise in bringing things back online. It is also a governance exercise in showing that the return to service was deliberate, evidence-based, and responsibly managed under pressure. Documentation gives the organization continuity, accountability, and a usable foundation for learning once the immediate strain begins to ease. There are several common mistakes that weaken recovery, and understanding them helps show what secure restoration really requires. One mistake is restoring too broadly before the organization knows which assets are genuinely ready, which can spread uncertainty back into the environment. Another is trusting backups, images, or accounts simply because they are available, without asking whether they were exposed, outdated, or poorly controlled. Teams also create problems when they focus only on technical uptime and ignore business process integrity, data accuracy, user access discipline, or dependency risks that may quietly undermine the restored service. Sometimes leaders become so eager to show progress that they declare recovery complete while responders still have active concerns about validation, monitoring, or unresolved trust questions. These are not abstract risks. They are common ways organizations turn a successful response into a shaky recovery. A strong security manager learns to resist symbolic restoration and instead push for restoration that is credible, measured, and stable enough to support real business confidence. Another valuable way to view secure recovery is as a bridge between incident response and long-term resilience improvement. The recovery phase often reveals which systems were too hard to rebuild, which data sources were poorly protected, which dependencies were poorly understood, which backup practices were weaker than expected, and which communication paths did not support confident decision-making. Those lessons are not just after-action notes. They are direct indicators of how well the organization is prepared for future disruption. If recovery took too long because ownership was unclear, that points to governance weakness. If restoration was risky because clean baselines were missing, that points to architecture and operational discipline issues. If leaders could not judge when a service was ready to trust again, that points to gaps in validation and risk reporting. For someone new to CISM, this is an important final teaching point before the conclusion. Secure recovery is not only about restoring what was lost. It is also about revealing what the organization must strengthen so the next incident is less damaging and less difficult to recover from. When you step back from the whole topic, the main lesson is that techniques for secure recovery and restoration are about rebuilding trust as much as rebuilding operations. The organization must restore systems, data, identities, and services in a way that reflects business priorities, uses trusted sources, validates carefully, communicates clearly, and keeps watch long enough to confirm that the danger has truly receded. For a beginner, the most important takeaway is that recovery is not a simple finish line reached when systems power back on. It is a managed return to confidence, where leaders have to balance urgency with discipline and progress with proof. Done well, secure recovery helps the organization resume operations with stability, credibility, and a stronger understanding of what truly matters when disruption strikes. Done poorly, it can undo the benefits of containment and eradication by reintroducing risk under the false comfort of apparent normality. That is why this phase deserves such careful attention from security leaders, because it is where the organization proves that it can return not just to activity, but to dependable and defensible operation.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.